Hi everyone, welcome back to Casual Watch Talk. This week I've got another interview for us, and I'm really interested about this one because we're going to be talking about watches and investment, a bit of cryptocurrency. But I'd like to welcome Dan onto the channel. Thanks for joining me, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, Dan, would you like to do a quick introduction to yourself so people know who you are?
I'm an artist, entrepreneur. In the art world, I'm Daniel Matthew York because in the where I'm from in Illinois, Chicago, there was 45 Dan Yorks. So to have your name stand out a bit, I had to spread it out into as many syllables as humanly possible, which luckily I was given that name. So, but that's how I am in the art world. But everybody really just calls me Dan.
Might as well do a wristwatch check. What are you wearing tonight?
Well, I'm in a honeymoon phase with a Moser right now. So
Oh,
I've been
Federico Talks Watches is a big fan, isn't he, of Moser?
Yeah, and I've been a big fan too. And the ones I really want are really hard to get right now, and that you can't even get them on the website. But right now, this is the new Mega Cool, the new Pioneer Mega Cool.
Oh, wow. Dial.
Yeah, so I just picked that up in Nashville at a jeweler here named King Jeweler. They're a Moser dealer here, and we're lucky enough to get this. And it's really a beautiful watch. The thing is when you see Mosers in person, they're just photos. I mean, I could say this about many watches, just photos never really communicate it. And sometimes, photos can communicate the wrong thing. You'll see it in a photo, you're like, I love this. And then you put it on and you're like, what is this? Moser's the opposite. The photos never do it justice. They're really beautiful. And it's funny, I just did this other watch podcast a couple days ago, and I made the point of comparing art to watches. And one of the things is you can really feel the love in some watches, like somebody really cared for this. It wasn't just a machine pumping it off of a line like a G-Shock. And believe me, I love G-Shocks, but I mean, it's an assembly line, and you can feel the love in this thing. I mean, somebody really was putting their heart into this, and maybe many people. But there's so many cool details on this that you can't really appreciate. Like, I don't know if you can really see this, but there's facets that they round in here.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so wild because what they're doing is they're taking a satin sort of straight polish, like a satin polish here, and then there's not even like a hard edge, and then they go into this hard polished here with these ribbings. I mean, this is some serious work, and I don't know if you can see the crystal there. It looks like a sports arena.
Yeah, it's like a domed. Yeah, I'll have to throw some pictures up as well if you've got any on your phone. We'll have to splice them in.
Yeah, they just do a really beautiful job. And the other thing I like too is they put the streamliner hands on this one. This is the first Pioneer that they've put the streamliner hands onto. Yeah, so there's just many details. One of them that I really love too is, I don't know if you can see this, but you see how the name in there is invisible until you put it in the light.
I was going to ask you whether it was if it was it looks unbranded.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess there was some argument whether because Moser likes to do the unbranded look. They figure that their look is the brand, right? And then sometimes they'll put their name on there. Apparently, there was a bit of an argument with this one where they didn't know whether they wanted to put their name on it or not. So what they did was this almost. At first, I thought it was engraved, but then I find out it's like a clear applied marker, like some sort of acrylic clear name, and it's cool because you can only see it in the right light. But anyway, so I'm still in honeymoon phase on this, and I usually am not a fan of canvas straps.
Yeah.
And this is a really beautiful strap though. I mean, it's canvas with a leather back. And the thing I still am getting used to on this is I like a little pliability to my straps, because I yank them on and yank them off, and leather you can do that with. This one you can't do that with. So it's something to get used to. But then when in Moser, if you've ever seen their rubber straps, they're great. I mean, just beautiful, and just they feel amazing. If you've ever held like an Everest strap, and you know how those feel, those aftermarket ones you can get, they feel like that, but just better designed, I think, in terms of the look. But I mean, I just can't break with that strap. It looks so good like that.
It matches the dial, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I don't know this about Moser, but is it? I know they're a sort of a small batch watchmaker, aren't they? But did you have to go on a waiting list or anything along those lines? No.
Well, this one was in the glass. I mean, I just got this a few weeks ago, and some of you, I guess, there's waiting lists. Like I want a streamliner center seconds, and they can't really get that on the watch. There's on the website, they're sold out. All the watches out in the field are selling for triple. And the funny thing is this Mega Cool is very difficult to get online. There's basically only one of them out there. I think it was out in Hong Kong. So, and it's not. I mean, they're not cheap, of course, but it's not ridiculously expensive either. It's not like, Rolex or Patek prices these days or something. But it is cool having something that, I think the whole company pumps out maybe 14 or 1500 watches a year. So how many of these are there? It's at a certain stage of watch collection. I'm sure you've been there. It's kind of cool to not wear the same thing that everybody else is wearing. Although I do have some of those too, but
Yeah,
yeah.
we've been having some lively discussions on the. We've got a Discord group. Been having live discussions about what is a watch an icon because the watch community says it's an icon,
Yeah, I
or
know.
should it be an icon because it had a purpose, whether it's military or its historical figure wore it, or it was a unique design, or it moved watchmaking forward, or something along those lines. So we've been having a bit of a back and forth argument on Discord, arguing that just because a YouTuber says it's iconic might not necessarily mean it's an iconic
Yeah,
watch.
I know. Instagram and YouTube have really morphed that whole thing. And there's been some legitimate, I mean, we could have that whole conversation right now. But let's before we jump into that, what's on your wrist? I saw something interesting going on over there
Yeah,
too.
I'm a huge fan of this. My collection is a bit more modest, but I'm a huge fan of it, like Christopher Ward. I don't know if you know
Oh
Christopher
yeah, yeah,
Ward.
sure.
Yeah, so they I think they're probably in the mid tier of Swiss watches. So they the 1,000 to 700 to a $3,000 range. I think Christopher Ward is probably the best value that you can get.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not expensive.
Yeah, they do a lot with the cases. They've got this light catcher case, and a lot of their newer watches are or measured to COSC, I should say. So even in that sort of $1,000 price range, you're still getting a COSC regular. They use Solita movements.
I'm sorry, you said they're using Solita stuff?
Solita, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they use Solita movements. In fact, this I've got another one here that is COSC regulated, which I'll flash a picture up for the viewers here. But it's an injected carbon case,
Mm-hmm.
so
Cool.
it's very light, and it's actually you can't really see this, but it's transparent. The dial is sort of suspended within the watch, and
Mm-hmm.
you can shine a light through, and it will come through the front. And this is a COSC regulated. They also designed it to have a spring loaded. The crown is spring loaded
Oh,
because
that's cool.
yeah,
So
I'll
instead of
have to.
putting in crown guards, you submerge the crown.
Yeah, apparently, Mike, who's the CEO of Christopher Ward, he's been on the channel a few times, and
Mm-hmm.
this was one of those necessity is the mother of invention, because he's a cyclist and he used to wear his Christopher Ward watch, but the way that he's a road cyclist, and the way his hands were on the bar, the crown was always digging into his wrist. So he actually went and tried to find a company that made this a spring-loaded crown. Apparently, it doesn't. There might only be one other watch that does it. I think Omega might make one, but they reverse engineered it and had this specially made just for this watch. So they do a metal version of this.
Is there a heavy water resistance on that, even though you're submerging the crown? I mean,
It's 150
oh,
meters.
that's yeah, totally
Yeah,
respectable. Yeah.
yeah. Christopher Ward's a really interesting brand. They also reverse engineered a super compressor dive watch case and had it they recreated it using their case manufacturer. They put a lot of time into designing unique cases. They're all about they have this methodology of each watch is a three times value. So you essentially pay three times what the watch is to make. So they go through the process of a third of it is what it actually costs to make the watch, and so on. So they kind of multiply it out. They were the first. I don't know if they've. Well, this is going to be an interesting topic to talk about. But yeah, I think they were the first fully. Somebody will correct me on this, but I think they were the first fully straight to internet watch company that didn't sell in stores. They were internet first, which
Yeah.
obviously a lot of the watch companies now are doing the reverse of that. But they were always buy it online, and then they have this 60/60 warranty. So you get a 5 year, 60-month warranty, but you get 60 days if you to return the watch if you like it or not. I think they
Are they still privately owned, or because another company that did that was, remember that one company on they were all over Facebook. MVMT, I think they were called, or
Yeah, movement.
Movement. I don't
Yeah.
know. Movement. Yeah, they ended up selling for like 100 million or something like that.
Yeah, movement's an interesting one. In fact, the I work for a tech startup that's based in San Diego, and the people that went to, I think they went to business school with the founders of Movement. But Movement was they got in early on the Kickstarter thing, and they were getting a
Mm.
lot of rebadged watches from Chinese makers and rebadging them and stuff. And yeah, I mean they were, I think they were the first. Maybe that's a lie because there's other marketing companies that do this, but they were a marketing company first, is how I
Yeah.
think of Movement, not a watch company.
Mm.
And but yeah, Christopher Ward were, uh, I think they were straight to internet first, and they do it. They offer, I think they offer a really good value for money watches.
That's
Honestly,
great.
so.
Yeah, I think there's some very cool stuff. I mean, there's so many cool brands coming out with so many interesting things right now, and it's a cool time to be a watch collector, and really you can really hone in on certain things. And that's one of the things that that I find is that you can, if you get too much into the watch community of what do we call it, the hype market, or the one-upmanship market, or something like that, or whatever you want to call it, you end up with a really shitty collection.
Yeah, we were talking about this sort of recently, and I refer to it as the paint by numbers watch collection.
Yeah, totally.
Where
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I need this dress watch, I need this watch, I need one of these, I need, and then when you end up looking at it, you're like, oh, do I even wear a dress watch?
I
Like,
know.
where do I go that I would need a?
Yeah. Yeah, I've gone through phases like that where I was like, okay, well, I'll have the dress watch, I'll have the sports watch, and then it would change to, then I went through a phase where I wanted to have one in every material, like a carbon fiber one and a ceramic one. And that was probably one of the more interesting phases that I went through, because it leads you into some very cool watches. Like one time I was in Orlando, as a matter of fact, or maybe it was Tampa. It was a they had that freak. It might have been, I think it was the Orlando Mall.
Oh
But
yeah, Ulysse Nardin.
yeah, it was the Ulysse Nardin, and it was the Freak X, I think they called it, but it was a carbon fiber freak. And I'm telling you, the thing was so light. It wasn't crazy expensive compared to the old freaks were like, I think 75, 80 grand or something. This one was about 20. And but man, I'm telling you, that thing was a really interesting watch. And I think some of these watches, I think, deserve more attention than, everybody looking at the same ceramic Daytona over and over and over and over. That was a really fascinating watch. But there's a lot of watches like that I ran into when I was like, oh, let's go look at ceramics and carbon fibers. And some people do really, really beautiful carbon fibers. As a matter of fact, I don't have it here, but I did have a picture of a couple of them. One of mine's in the shop, some of them are, but I ended up having this, and that's the new Zenith Carbon.
Yeah, so it's the Zenith Defy, is it?
Yeah, it's the Zenith Defy Carbon, and you can get it with the carbon strap, but the way to get it is with this rubber strap, and it's 41 millimeters. And I'm going to tell you, it's beautiful in light. It's sort of, the vibe of it is really interesting because, they're owned by LVMH now, so they kind of, they get Biver at the helm, and then they get the sharing of, I think, all the component technology from Hublot, but it's almost like they're doing Hublot better than Hublot's doing it, and then you get a Zenith movement in it, right? So you're getting this really cool stuff, and I'm telling you, these rubber canvas straps that these guys are doing, and their clasps are so top notch, and you put it on, it feels so cool. But the vibe to me is like an 80s movie. It's almost like Miami Vice meets like a Swatch watch that, it doesn't cost you 50. It's like a Swatch watch kind of vibe. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a forged carbon, I presume. This
Yeah.
Christopher Ward's using an ejected carbon, but I think forged carbon is a type of carbon fiber, and it doesn't have it has that beautiful, almost like marble like
Totally.
texture to it, doesn't it? Instead of the like a layered carbon carbon fiber.
Yeah, it's almost like tiger print almost, or what's another way to put it? I don't know. It's like you're saying, but it's really beautiful stuff.
It's a really interesting material. I know Doxa, the famous dive watch makers, are using they've made a forged carbon cased watch as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cool stuff about that too is that I'm pretty good on my watches. I know some guys trash their watches, but the reliability of it you scratch them and they don't really scratch that much. It's kind of like, it's similar to ceramic to me.
I'm amazed with ceramic as well.
Yeah.
The I think the best one I've ever seen was the Grey Side of the Moon, the Omega
Oh yeah.
Speedmaster Grey
I've
Side of
seen
the
that
Moon.
too here. Yeah, in Nashville they had one of those.
Incredible. Yeah, incredible with those rose gold,
Not
the
cheap
rose
though.
gold
Not
hands.
cheap.
No, they're. I think they retail for about 11,000, but I don't even know if they still make it now, but I'm sure it's more than that. And it comes on that grey crocodile strap. It's one of my favorite Omegas that I've ever reviewed. Was the Grey Side of the Moon. I did the Dark Side of the Moon, but to me it's too shiny. It's too glossy.
Mm-hmm.
I got a brief list of some of the watches that in your collection. You really focused for a while on Rolex. Was that how you started getting into watches? Because you've got quite a few key Rolex pieces, quite a few sought
Yeah.
after ones.
And they're mostly accidents. That's the funny thing is it's funny. I'm not even a huge Rolex guy. I'm more of I like precious metals, and one thing I found is when my collection was morphing, because like I said, I went from materials to and I kind of went through a phase where I'm like, well, I should have like a staple piece, like an AP and this, but that really was boring. And one time I was in Vegas, which I go to frequently for watch stores because
I love Vegas for watch
that's all I
stores.
go for. I go for food, to get fat, and to to go to the watch stores there because they got everything. But one time I was putting on a Royal Oak. This is back when you could get Royal Oaks about 3 years ago. And they wanted, I put on it was a 41 millimeter Royal Oak chrono, black face, stainless steel, under the glass. Okay. And, I was like, okay, well, what kind of deal would you guys give me on this? They're like, no deals. And I was like, you guys, well, I didn't know back then that we were going to go into this craziness and that was going to be a $50,000 watch, but it just didn't, it just wasn't me. That's all it was. I mean, I just put it on and I just like, it's just not me. I feel like a different person. And so, um, but I'm glad that I've went through that phase, albeit sometimes that phase can get very expensive when you're moving watches every few months like I do. But you do sort of find yourself as a watch collector and you start finding these little uh, nuances of yourself that are expressed in watches. And those are my favorite watch guys and my favorite watch conversations to have. Because sometimes guys do nuance out into Rolex and that's totally okay, so long as it's kind of like their shtick. I really enjoy that.
One of the members of our Facebook group, Lee, who's a groundskeeper at a golf course,
Mm-hmm.
and he wears Rolexes as he's doing his groundskeeping. So he has these great shots of him in his gear, or he's on the back of a John Deere. He has Explorer, and he also has a 41 mil Datejust. It just looks perfect. He's got his gardening gloves on, and like you say, that watch is really him. Like it's the white dial, and when I think of him, I think of that watch. And you're right. It's one of the beautiful things of collecting, isn't it? Finding things that you like and really discovering, like you said, a bit of a part of yourself in your collection journey as you go through.
I guess you could do this with anything, like you said, this one guy you were talking about, the CEO of this watch company was a cyclist, and I've cycled. And the funny thing is I also had run into that same problem where my watch crowns had created this dry patch of skin from constantly rubbing and sweating. And I was like, oh, I guess I just don't. It's funny. I do have a cycling watch that I wear, and it's this old G-Shock that I'll never sell. It's an old Giaz. I don't even know how old that is, maybe 10 or 12 years old. But you notice there's no crowns. And so it's and the sides here are plastic, so it's very easy on the skin. So when I do cycle, this thing's great. The thing that sucks is the salt from your skin that you sweat out gets in the strap and you can never get it out. So the thing just looks like total hell. Plus it's been in the ocean, and I mean, I've just beat this thing down and it's never died on me. But the discovery phase is, I think, very cool. It teaches you a lot about yourself and individuality and growth. And what I would buy 10 years ago or even 15 years ago is so completely different than what I would get now. But I also am in life, in my careers, an opportunist. So when an opportunity presents itself, you got to jump at it. And I've made the mistake of not doing that too, because sometimes you get lucky with them and you find things that you do love like that.
Yes, you mentioned that you saw an AP in the case, and the watch industry has just gone absolutely crazy now. And I
Haywire
know
for
this is
those, yeah.
something, yeah, I know this is something you've been following, and I'm really interested to get your opinion just on the watch bubble, if it is a bubble, the craziness with COVID and vintage watches, and how we've got really from a short period of time, 3 to 5 years from having watches that were quite obtainable, or at least you could buy them, now to being, especially Rolex is a good example, but where they've become so unobtainable now. Like the Nautilus you used to be able to buy, and
Oh
now they're
no.
producing a Tiffany one. So I'd love to get your opinion on what you think of all that.
To me, that's just an economics conversation. Some guys think it's just watches, and I'm like, well, it's so tied together. And like the Nautilus, it's funny. A buddy of mine in the Aquanaut, I'm going to say the Nautilus and Aquanaut. So I was in my store. I had a Rolex dealer in Florida, which is now closed. I used to go to these real boutique Rolex stores that had, Rolex and Patek Philippe and some other niche brands. And of course, Rolex closed all those and went to these big box retailers. But one time I was in there and they had an Aquanaut, right? $21,000. Right. We're talking I think it's the 5167A. Isn't that the 40 millimeter one? The one that's $50,000 now. So I was like, not my thing, too conservative. I'm an artist and I'm, a metalhead artist, like, nah, not my thing. And it was a beautiful watch. And then those same two watches I was just looking at David SW in the store. I was in Orlando at David SW. He had two of them. Wanted 72 or 75,000 bucks for him. And one of them was brand new. I was like, damn, So in the Nautilus, I was in a shop once and they're like, yeah, 29 grand. Well, now they're like $130,000 for that same exact watch. But it just, to me, it comes down to economics, right? You have a hard, tangible asset, and it's not just the watch world. It's cars too. It's these these luxury cars, and all luxury items are doing this. So to me, it's the flow of money. And is it a bubble? Yeah, it's a bubble. There's always bubbles. I mean, bubbles always burst. Some people are like, well, Bitcoin's never going to go down. Well, yeah, okay. Well, then it went down by $35,000 in a month. And then, cars are never going to go down. Well, then they do. And watches are never going to go down. And then they do. I mean, it's just, it's going to come from somewhere. But what I like to pay attention to in all of this is there's luxury goods, watches included, and then there's cash, and then there's the stock market, and then there's cryptocurrencies, and then there's real estate. They're all high. And typically what you'll have when you just look at history is like, well, one of them goes down, one of them goes up, It's just somebody uses fear and drives down one market, and then the other one goes up. I mean, and we don't have that right now. Okay, so if you just get straight economically minded, you go, why? And you go, well, that's because they're pumping money into society like sunshine up an asshole. I mean, it's just going really hard. And so it's got to move somewhere. And there's a lot of really intelligent people out there that know what to do with it. And they're going to move it into luxury assets or real estate or, just anything that is not cash, because cash will deflate, We're going to have inflation at unmatched rates. I mean, we're probably already there, but I mean, every year it's going to get worse. So what are you going to do? Hold on to a dollar that's going to lose 20% of value every year? Or are you going to put it into a ceramic Daytona Panda that is going to go up by, at this rate, whatever it is, like 10,000 a year or something like that? Those things are going for like $45,000. It's a $12,000 watch. And so I think that is going to be a trend for a while. And if money printing stops and interest rates start going back up and we start looking at normal economics moving in, maybe it'll start to settle down. And if that's the case, then we can all go back to being like, oh, good, we're going to get anything we want. And they're going to look like deals to us.
The level there's been a price breach, hasn't there? Whereas
Totally.
it's the bubble might burst, but the bubble might burst, but you're not going to get a Rolex for $5,000.
No.
It's not like they're going to be fire sailing these things because they've made too much. The breach has already been there. I did a little experiment on the channel that we've sort of been following where I sold some of my crypto. I'm glad I did, actually, because it was Cardano. And I bought a Rolex OP. So I've got a blue OP Rolex, and I'm going to keep it.
The Tiffany blue one?
No, it was call it the midnight blue.
Yeah, that's pretty though. I've seen that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't actually. I've got it stored away because I'm going to keep it as like a little investment, and then judge at the end, a year or whatever, which was the better investment. So I thought I would put my money where my mouth is, because I do a little bit of cryptocurrency investing not a lot, but I know a little bit about crypto. But then when I was looking at alternative investments, I was chatting to a friend who has got really into investing in gemstones. And he's like, "Oh, you should invest in gemstones." I'm like, "Well, I don't understand it." And he's like, "Well, what
Yeah.
do you understand?" I'm like, "Well, I understand watches." He's like, "Well, why don't you do that?" So
Hmm.
that's what actually got me thinking about buying a Rolex, because before I always the stage where I was when I bought it or at my collecting journey, they were still quite high, and I was like, "Are they worth it?" But then when I started thinking about them as an investment or a store of value, that's and then they actually looked like they were quite reasonably priced based on how they've currently gone up, and if you could get one at retail, which I managed to do. So
Yeah, and you actually said the exact phrase that I think of watches. I mean, for me, watches are a fun hobby, you know? And we could, some people go like, you guys spend so much money on these stupid watches, and it's such a, I mean, this makes no sense. Well, of course it doesn't make sense. Nobody's hobbies make any sense. You do it because you like it, right? So, and we all know that, but it is kind of nice that this hobby can be viewed as a tangible asset. But store of value, funny enough, is the phrase that I use. It's a store of value because how do you know that a Datejust is going to go up, or how do you know a Daytona is? You don't. It could go down. Their production numbers could go up by 250,000 a year next year. We don't know. I mean, so, but it is a store of value, and you do know that it's going to have some at least intrinsic value. Like if you were able to buy a Daytona for 12,000, it's worth 50,000 today. Well, that was a good investment, but at a bare minimum, you're going to be able to sell that thing for $12,000. It's the old phrase for Rolex, Rolex is good as cash.
just for because I've got viewers of collectors of all different ranges, and you can even apply that to watches that go. I think vintage Seiko watches, percent wise, if you've
Hmm.
got some of those early the Vietnam era ones, the 62 MAS, if you've got some of those vintage Seikos, they've probably appreciated in value percentage wise as much as some luxury
Yeah.
timepieces.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's some bargains that I think are still to be had. The problem that I have personally with vintage is that I don't know enough about it not to
Yeah.
get burnt.
Yeah. You and me both. I'm not a huge vintage guy. I really respect it. And I've seen some really beautiful vintage watches on buddies of mine, but I don't invest the time to know that like you would really need to. And and frankly, I'm so busy with all the things that I do. Sometimes I just like I've got a few watches in the shop right now, but I mean that's rare. I mean these modern watches, I mean they're warranted up the wazoo. You barely ever have to take them in, and I sort of like that aspect of it.
So looking at your collection, you've
Yeah.
got a number of Rolexes, but you've got one of my favorite brands on there as well, Breitling, and I still think Breitling. The prices are across the spectrum,
Mm.
but I think some of the entry level ones, the divers, the super oceans, some of the even the quartz watches from a few years ago, using that super quartz watches, I think Breitling could be that next one of them. And it is a big brand, but I think it could be one of those next big collectors brands because they've got so many eclectic vintage ones, but also I think a lot of the newer ones are
Yeah,
a
I
low
think
barrier of entry.
I don't know why. I think they're bigger in Europe than they are in the US. And I've had a lot of Breitlings. I went through a whole Breitling phase, and my favorite ones were the super quartzes. I loved those. I mean, I've had probably 4 or 5 aerospaces. The one that I have currently, funny enough, after I did this other watch podcast like 2 or 3 days ago, the battery died during the podcast. I was like, son of a bitch, that battery has been alive for so long. And I go, what a coincidence that during the show it would go dead. So, but it's a really rare one. And it's funny because the story behind it is I was dating this one girl who bought me one. She knew I liked these aerospaces, and I would kind of move through them. This was an aerospace Evo, and I saw this under the glass, and she had convinced me not to get it because she'd bought me one for my birthday, and it was just a regular one. So I was like, all right, fine, I won't get it. Well, then I kind of changed my mind. I was like, no, I want this one because it was the Cobra yellow face, and Breitling does a yellow like that's nobody's business. Nobody does a yellow as cool as Breitling, and that's at least what it looks like photo wise.
Oh yeah.
But it's an aerospace Evo and night mission, so it's got the blacked out titanium. It's not even blacked out; it's like a grayed out titanium with that Cobra yellow. It's a super cool watch, not crazy expensive, and just a fun watch to wear. But unfortunately, like I said, it's in the shop. But anyway, so I didn't buy it, and I had that thing on Chrono 24 on watch and on eBay on watch. I had to wait like 4 years for that thing to come up again, and as soon as I saw one, I was like, snatched it because it's hard to get. But I've had um like Navitimers, which was a very cool watch. Coincidentally, the Navitimer, of all the watches I've ever worn, I think that one had more compliments than just about anything else I've ever had.
Yeah, and I think as well, I need to do a video on this, but the Navitimer's got one of the most interesting histories, I think, of
Hmm.
any particular watch model. I know the Submariner and the Speedmaster,
Sure.
they've got their history, but Breitling himself was flying the Navitimer over to the Allied forces during war times, or an early version of it, so they could navigate with it as well. And then
Hmm.
his son kind of really bought the Navitimer to. It's got such a fascinating history. I don't know whether it's because a Breitling doing a good job of being custodians of their own history, or marketing things the way that other companies are, or maybe they're seen as um, accessible, and therefore they don't
Hmm.
have the similar cachet to like Rolex. Or I mean, what do you think about this idea of Rolex and the other brands with their watch inventory, and whether there's this perceived shortage of supply, or whether it's just because there's more demand? I mean, their argument is there's more demand.
It's probably true. I mean, d- did Rolex really plan? I mean, here's the way I think about it. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and you always think it was sales and marketing and niching out and things, and finding your paths. Did Rolex and Patek Philippe and AP really um, go like, hey, let's short the market supply to create this huge explosion? I don't know. I mean, it would be really brilliant if they did, I suppose. But you just don't know. I mean, it's not like Rolex isn't producing a lot of watches. I mean, they're one of the, in terms of Switch watch brands, I mean, they've got more facilities to produce more watches than any of these guys, and I don't think anybody really knows the numbers. I certainly don't, but I heard it's something like 900,000 to a million watches a year. And um, it it's sort of tough to say something like that. I'm certainly not negative about it. If they've had a lot of success, I feel like more power to you, and well done for finding a pathway. Because really, all of us, no matter what we do for a living in a career, if we're successful, we know it's hard won. We know it's by hard work, finding a path. You've lots of blood, sweat, and tears on the way, and it was no different for any of them. I mean, even Rolex in the 80s was making quartz watches. You know what I mean? So uh, AP had to navigate that, and Patek Philippe. I mean, as a matter of fact, I'm a big fan of. I'm not a huge Patek Philippe guy. Very much respect the brand, but a lot of them are just not my style, except for this. Okay, this is a golden ellipse. Okay, and I love the golden ellipses from them. I think it's the best watch they make. It's to me a fascinating look. It's super comfortable. This is the platinum version, and you can't really tell in the light right now because it's nighttime out here, but it's got this super dark blue strap, and the face is a cobalt blue, and that face is actually gold. So it's a platinum watch with gold inside, and they even made this blue gold face. It's beautiful, and it just has a look about it. But one of the ones that is I'm trying to find is they did one that was a mix of this golden ellipse and the Nautilus. And I think it has a nickname of the Nautilips or something they call it, and it's quartz usually. So, and it's a total bastardization of both of these watches. So you have the beauty of this, the beauty of a Nautilus, and they merged them into one watch, and it's ugly and crazy. And I'm like, well, I gotta find that. I gotta find that one.
Patek of a moving. Well, they're not moving away from the Nautilus, but they're ending the steel Nautilus, aren't they? Because they don't want to be seen as just the company that makes that watch. I mean, how do you feel about that decision? Because they were printing money, weren't they, with the steel Nautilus?
Well, I mean, at a retail level, I mean, I don't know that they were printing money. I think they were probably, for them, they were probably making the same amount of money on it every year because they're the one producing it. They're selling it to their retailers. The retailers are probably selling it at retail because I think these guys all have policies about not price gouging at the retail level. And I know like Rolex, I can't speak for Patek, but I know Rolex has some internal rules, I suppose, for their dealers that they can't just go out and sell them out to gray dealers for big prices like that. So, and I believe that too. You've heard rumors like that, but I've experienced this personally. So I don't know that they're making any more money that way. And I think the hype is cool for them because it's free. I mean, that's advertising you can't buy, right? But I do, when uh, I think Terry Stern did an interview on that not too long ago, and I go, uh, I can see what he means. It's kind of like Luke Hamill acting in Star Wars. Well, nobody knows that guy for the rest of his life other than for being Luke Skywalker, right? And I think he was trying to avoid that. And you go, I get it's a good concept, and people get too focused and put horse blinders on the income of it, and like, I can't believe they're not going to produce that. And who knows, maybe they will. Maybe they'll keep doing a new face, and it'll be like Ozzy Osbourne, who keeps doing retirement tours every 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, and they definitely played all of the used dealers at their own game, didn't they, when they released that Tiffany one, and it
Yeah,
went for, was it 5 million or something, or
something like that.
the first one. But yeah, it's become. I totally see your point on that, because yeah, it's the resellers that were making the money on
Hmm.
that. I mean, how do you feel about the way that there's this whole? I mean, it's always been the case, but there now seems to be, especially on YouTube, there's a more prevalence of this glorification of the grey market dealers.
Hmm.
This kind of very much as they're the new entrepreneurs of, and this is the way to make a lot of money quick, as in buying a Richard Mille and then flipping it, and then just this constant cycle of money. So they're building a kind of a business out of reselling watches, but they're presenting themselves as if they're entrepreneurs in a certain industry. How does that sit with you?
I mean, that's what I love about the world. I mean, people will find a way, old doors close, new doors open, and I feel fine about that. But I do think that, what comes up will come down. I mean, things aren't always going to be going straight up in the way that they are. So it's kind of like real estate agents, and I'm 43 now. So in the 90s, you saw this huge real estate explosion, right, in the States. And everybody and their brother became a real estate agent. I mean, everybody who's these part-time real estate agents all over the place. Well, when the real estate market tanked, the market shook out, and the only people that survived that was the real brokers and the real agents. Anybody can sell in a good market. Anybody can move something in a hot market because you're order takers. But the real survivors can move through the low markets and the low markets, and move through that. And so you'll see that, I think, with all these gray dealers, all these, there's always been gray dealers, but
Yes.
not to this volume. And some kid that moves into it thinks he's some hot shot because he can, get access to some guy in Portugal who's going to flip him a couple of Rolexes and then sell them for a $25,000 profit in the States. Those days won't always exist, and they'll probably end sooner than we both think.
I'm same age as you, similar, and I've lived through that sort of late 90s, early
Hmm.
2000s, a clubbing scene where DJs suddenly became the superstars. It
Yeah,
wasn't.
right.
It moved from the music, it moved from the trance music to where the DJ was the superstar, and some of them, incredible careers born from there, Tiesto and Paul van Dyk and so on. And now I feel like in our little niche of watch collecting is the last year was the year of the superstar grey dealer, and
Hmm.
and like you say, all the more credit to them for
Yeah,
doing it,
and it's
making
all going
hay
to move
while the
in
sun
phases. I mean,
shines.
like you were bringing up Breitling, okay? So I mean, in like 2005 through 2010, big watches were the thing. Like everybody had to have a big watch, and Breitling even made like a 51 millimeter emergency. And I think the emergency is a super cool watch. But 51 millimeters, I put that thing on and I was like, holy shit, this thing is like wearing. I mean, it was light because it's titanium, but I mean, it was just. I felt like Flavor Flav, like putting this giant thing on my wrist. And Breitling really went through this kind of, I don't know, some would maybe call it like fashion watch kind of a thing. I personally, I liked it. I thought the chronomats were super cool looking. I liked the modern look. I think they had a real sweet spot towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s with the chronomat. I'm trying to remember the name of it. They would do two-toned accents on it.
Yeah, I love the B1, the Anidigi from that time, the
Yeah,
Breitling B1.
very cool watch. Yeah, and the right size too for what it was. So, but they kind of overshot the mark, and then everybody came back, and now and it's funny, in 5 years the whole world had changed from these huge watches, and now the trend is getting back down to 39 millimeters, and AP's even coming out with I think 36 or 37 millimeters, and it's now the big trend again. So people are throwing away all these big watches. I have not. I still have one big watch from that trend that I still like and still have, that people probably think is a douche watch, and I'm a douche for wearing it, but I'm like, hey, whatever.
It's all about the lug to lug measurement, isn't it? And
Hmm.
also how, as I've got more into watch collecting, I'm amazed at how the balance of a case it's become more of the key to me, like how it balances on the wrist. And I think some of these, when you get a perfectly balanced watch, is, I mean, Rolex do a great job at balancing their watches, but some of the watches I've had where they sort of like hanging off your wrist,
Hmm. Yeah, totally.
I'm over that phase.
Yeah, yeah, they do. It is an interesting thing with, like, oh, you mentioned Rolex and the balance, because they just did that whole 1 millimeter upgrade. Have you messed around with the 40s compared to the 41s and like the subs yet?
No, I haven't actually. I used to get access to quite a lot of Rolexes for filming because Bob's Watches, who's a big
Yeah,
Rolex
sure.
dealer, was based around the corner from where I was in California. But now I've moved to Florida. I mean, before we finish up here, we've talked about most of the main watch brands here, but we haven't talked about is. And I think this is one of the biggest watch phenomenons of 2020. Certainly, if you look on YouTube, is Richard Mill or Richard Mill. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
what's your view on that as a long term sort of luxury watch collector? That
Um,
brand and how it's sort of
well, see, now this, I put my artist hat on for this because I'm an artist, of course, right? So I look at things, and funny enough, the watches that I buy, I mean, I look at them, first of all, when I buy a watch, it has to have the it factor. It's just got to hook me for some reason that's just what I get hooked on. But I also look at it from the viewpoint of skin tone. And, I'm Irish German, so I have white skin, and you can see pink, and my veins are blue. And, even though I have yellow gold watches, yellow gold is not my color, right? I just happen to like yellow gold because it's classic and it's cool, and it harkens to the 80s kid in me that I grew up with all these guys wearing yellow gold watches. So it's kind of cool, but it's just not my color. So um I love Richard Mille is how I say it. That's how I've always learned to say it, and I hope that's
yeah. I'm
correct.
sure I'm
So
saying it wrong. Richard Mille. Yeah.
it's probably going to be like Ricky Millie. We're all going to find out. We're going to be like, oh, he's this kid from Brooklyn or something.
Well, he's actually big friends with Sylvester Stallone, isn't he? When he made Sylvester Stallone designed that watch that was like $1 million or
Oh
something
yeah,
that subsequently Sylvester Stallone sold his version of it. So I don't know what that says about maybe
yeah.
they had a falling out, but
Yeah, I think it's really incredible that some of these brands are so old, and they've had so much time and decades to craft their success, and these guys have done it in what, less than 20 years, and they're huge. I mean, back 15 years ago, all the sports guys were wearing Hublot, right? And they all had different Hublot, and now they're all wearing Richard Mille. So I think they're really interesting, and they're almost like patchwork in a way, which I really love. And I think they're doing like the candy stuff. Did you ever see the candy watches they were
yeah,
doing? I
yeah.
think that's hyper cutting edge watchmaking, and so artistic, and very very niche community. I think I saw mostly hip hop guys wearing those. Um, and the prices have been insane. Now, my favorite one that they ever did was the 67, and that was they did two versions of it, which one was a pink gold and then one was a titanium, and it was their ultra flat with the tonneau case. And you used to be able to pick it up for $1.25, six figures, of course, $1.25. And I think those are even doubled in prices. But that one looked like a New York City Art Deco building to me. And I love deco. I love old, 30s and 40s. I just loved old American Art Deco stuff. And so the writing on there, I'm not sure if that was their intention, but that's what it looked like to me. It was the best thing they ever did. Now they're, just going crazy with their prices too. I went to their Vegas shop. You go in there and there's nothing in there. You go in, it's empty. You're like, oh, what can I look at? They're like, nothing. You can put it
Yeah,
in
there's
order.
that one watch in the window.
Yeah,
Isn't
that's
I
right.
remember? Yeah, there's one watch in the window, and then you go in and they have this beautiful book laid out that's the catalog, and then
Yeah.
it's one of those watch shops that I've always quite intimidated to go in. Like I would, I'd walk into the Hublot and the others, but Richard Mille, you feel like it's the show, isn't it? a theater of a watch shop. It's not actually
Yeah.
a.
Welcome to our store. What can I not help you with? All right.
Live a bit too far away now, but where we used to live in California, we could drive to Vegas, and I loved watch shopping in Vegas. I bought a Tudor Black Bay 58 from Vegas, which
Yeah.
was,
Did
it was
you
cool.
still have that, or did you move it?
I moved it. I'm very much. I don't know. Maybe this is a good sort of part to finish on. I'm very much. If I wear a watch and even if I love it, after a while and maybe I get a new watch and my taste change, I don't often hold on to them. I don't. If I sell a watch, I never feel like I have to buy it back. I don't know whether it's just me or like as I'm going from much. I mean, I had my Speedmaster that I got married in. I've had it for 12 years. I sold that. I sold my Black Bay 58. I sold a couple of other Omegas that I really wanted at the time. I don't know whether I'm more of a lust after a watch and then I'm on to different things, but I don't feel the need to hold on
Once
to
the
them. I
game's
mean,
over, you're like, I'm good. Yeah.
yeah, I
So
don't know. That's
you never like, like, so if you sell one, you never wish you had it back. You've never gone through that where like, oh,
I've
I shouldn't have sold that one.
no, I've never done that.
Wow.
I think because
Okay.
in my collection, the ones that actually have value to me are the watches that I inherited. So I've got,
Mm.
my granddad's a Casio from my granddad. I got a Timex from another granddad, and I've got my a watch from my father-in-law who passed away. So those are the actual valuable to me. And the other watches, I just love watches so much that I think I like experiencing different watches. Maybe I'll go through a phase where I'm like, oh God, I wish I hadn't sold the that particular watch, but it's not happened so far to me. And maybe it's because I'm reviewing watches and I'm getting a lot of watches, coming and going on the
Yeah,
channel. So
you can get, I don't want to say the word jaded, but you can, when you get a lot of that stuff happening and you're in that all the time, you can really, get sort of flat on the whole thing. I'll tell you, I don't typically regret stuff that I move either, because I'll move stuff pretty fast. Sometimes I'll hold on to it for 3 weeks and move it and try to not take a bath on it. Um, and some of them you really do take a bath on, but you try to mitigate that as much as possible. But there are a handful that, I'll find myself thinking about, and I'm like, and for a long time, and I'll be like, I shouldn't have sold that one. And those are the ones that end up becoming permanent collectors, like this Submariner. Like, I was so sick of Submariners, okay? And I've had 1, 2, 3, or 4 Submariners now. And I started off with the same one that everybody else has, which is the 40 millimeter, sub. And I just got sick of seeing 20 of them in the airport every time I was in an airport, and everybody had it. I just got sick of it. And so then I moved on to the bluesy, the two-tone bluesy. And I was like, well, that's a little bit more distinct. It's a real man's watch. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I made the mistake of putting on the full 18 karat gold version in a store in Atlanta. And I was like, well, obviously I'm going to get rid of the two-tone and get that. You can't have the two-tone version, right? And then I sold it. I had it for I had the full 18 karat gold version. I sold it for 2 years. And like I said, I'm not even a diehard Rolex guy, right? And I sold it for about I would say a 40% profit after wearing it for 2 years. So I was like, oh, it made good. But the funny thing is I weirdly regretted it. And for a while. And so my Rolex dealer here in Nashville, this is a new 41, by the way. I just got this a couple months ago at retail, believe it or not. So they called me. I said, hey, if you get another one of those in, I'll buy it. And this is the 41 millimeter. So I bought it back, and I won't sell it again. Just because it was one of those that, for whatever weird reason, I just got attached to it and I missed it. And so you get it back. Another really cool one was the JLC Amvox series. Have you ever seen those?
no.
Super cool
Oh,
watch.
are they titanium? They're
Some
not the
of them, I
titanium
think,
Navy SEALs ones.
some of the Amvoxes are titanium. Mine was. I don't know if all of them are though. They've had like 7 iterations, but I think you with like your Chris Ward and those, and you can appreciate the interesting details. The Amvoxes are very cool because the crown, I'm sorry, the crystal is the chronograph. So you press the crystal, start, stop, and then reset is pressing the bottom of the crystal. And they made them so that you could touch them with, driver's gloves, because you're not going to, there's no way you're moving Daytona little crowns on a driving gloves. So And of course, nobody really uses those for those anyway. But that's another one. There's an Amvox too that's it's black coated titanium, and I think there was maybe 300 or 500 of them ever made, and so this particular one had a particular strap, and I had it, flipped it, and then that's one of those where I should probably go and start finding that one again. But it came in certain iterations, so now you got to go hunting for a pretty rare watch that, if I could find the one that I had, that would be cool too. So it's been an interesting thing on the watch collecting, though, is once in a while I'll hang up on that, and those become actual permanent adds to the collection, not flippers anymore.
Well, that's been such an interesting talk. Dan, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk.